Okay, let's talk about how we are very susceptible to manipulation and gaslighting. It would be hard for me to adequately describe for you how pervasive manipulating and gaslighting are in the fundamentalist religions. And I really do mean gaslighting. Just to stop and make sure that everybody knows what that means, there are lots of forms of manipulation that people can engage in, but in particular, gaslighting refers to a particular type of manipulation that involves causing the manipulated person to feel crazy or to at least question their own reality in order to get them to conform to what the abuser wants. Super common, super common in the fundamentalist religions. And it happens because when everybody around you all thinks the same thing and you're all supposed to think the right things no matter what your eyes are telling you, your ears are telling you, it does cause you to question your own reality. People within conservative religions, but within fundamentalist religions, are asking you to question your own reality on purpose because you're supposed to conform. You're supposed to believe what you're supposed to believe. You're supposed to believe what the book says, what the leadership says. You have to believe those things over your own reality. So, when everybody around you thinks that men should rule over women and that women should be subservient and that you're evil if you don't go to church and that you'll literally doom your children to a life of sin and debauchery if you don't raise them strictly religious, um, then anyone who stands up against those beliefs is literally viewed as crazy in those conservative circles. Um, and it's very difficult in these situations to keep thinking our own thoughts and believing what we authentically believe and not to just go back to conforming to those extreme religious ways of thinking. This is especially hard for children because children haven't got a broad worldview yet. They've been sheltered and contained. They haven't had a chance yet to really notice that not everybody thinks this way and not everybody conforms. I think that part of why we're seeing such huge culture wars in the US right now, including a lot of backlash against queer folks like us, people who are gender nonconforming, transgender, all of the LGBTQ community. I think that part of why the culture war is so extreme is because a lot of conservatives literally think we're crazy. We have stepped outside of what they have chosen to believe. We've stepped outside of the worldview that they have chosen. And I think they actually think we must have been crazy in order to do that. In fairness, a lot of liberal people think that conservative people are crazy as well. So this does go both directions. But I think that part of why a lot of conservatives are trying to ban drag shows is that they think gay people and drag queens and transgender people are literally crazy. They literally think we're nuts. A lot of them. It's important to understand that when you're constantly surrounded by people who expect you to believe things that your eyes and ears tell you are not factual, this is harmful to developing human brains. I'm going to give you three fairly random examples. Um, One that's fairly benign but still problematic is that Catholics are taught about transubstantiation. They're taught that the communion bread and wine are turned into the literal body and blood of Christ. Again, this is pretty benign, but stay with me because this is how this works. On some level, every little kid who ever took their first communion, having been taught that has been turned into the literal body and blood of Christ, is going to taste that communion wafer and taste that wine, and they're going to notice that the communion wafer crunches like a cracker or a piece of pie crust or some little piece of pastry, and that the wine tastes like wine. Every little kid by that point has lost a tooth. They know what blood tastes like in their mouths just from having lost a tooth. And that wine doesn't taste anything like blood, but they're supposed to believe that it is. It's just a little example of how we are taught not to believe our own perceptions, not to believe what our body is telling us is true. You're not supposed to believe your eyes and your taste buds and your sense of smell. You have to go on believing the doctrine. And when it comes to communion wafers and wine, not that big a deal, except that you're being taught not to trust yourself. This is hard for us. Another not benign example, children being told to always obey and revere their parents and grown-ups. Every single one of us at many times in our lives watched parents and other grown-ups behave in ways that we knew were deplorable or at least not great. But we were taught to reconsider what was coming up in our minds. I must be understanding this because my grown-ups are right. So I must be just processing this wrong. I must be misunderstanding the situation. Um, and it's especially bad in cases of abuse. My parents love me, so when they do this horrible thing to me, it must be okay because my parents love me. I'm taught that I'm supposed to believe these things. Similarly, women who are taught to obey husbands, even if the husband is abusing them, she's supposed to think that it's all right because somehow he's got a direct line to God and he's the one who's got the authority and the rightness in the family. So women who report abuse within conservative religion are very often taught that they are actually crazy or making it up because he wouldn't do that. He's a good religious man. This can't be happening. Just over and over and over again, we are forced by the people around us to doubt what we know. This is hard for us. This is inherently traumatizing. When you've spent your life being fed dogma and being forced to believe it, and then you keep looking at it and you realize that it doesn't feel right to you, that's difficult. Um, and it's not just that you sometimes didn't develop good critical thinking skills along the way. You're actually being taught not to trust yourself, not to trust your own eyes and ears and thought processes. So survivors of religious trauma actually tend to be very susceptible to further abuse and to gaslighting later in life simply because we're used to it. And I want to point out that if we were born into these religions, then we had no agency and no clear ability to think our own thoughts and believe ourselves from the earliest time. This is not, we didn't give up our agency and buy into that religion. We didn't ever lose our critical thinking abilities. They were taken away from us before we were even born. And it was enforced in a very authoritarian and very all encompassing way where most of the people around us um, were pushing us to believe what we were supposed to believe. So, how can we help ourselves and how can we help our clients? This is one of the most helpful and most fruitful parts of my work. And it's still a little bit hard to put into words, but at some level, everyone who leaves religion, even partly, does so because they knew the truth on some level. They didn't get so pushed into conformity. They didn't get so pushed into other people's ways of thinking, or even if they were pushed, they got out of it. They knew the truth on some level. That little kid knew this doesn't taste like human flesh and blood. That kid knew, yes, my parents love me, but I don't think what they're doing to me is right. That wife knew, maybe my husband loves me on some level, but this is not okay. On some level, we always knew the truth, and getting back in touch with that truth is beautiful. It's life affirming, it's restorative. Um, it happens gradually, but we can get better and better and better at it. I've got whole lists of questions that I ask my clients, a lot of very clear, simple, basic questions about what they themselves observe and what they themselves believe. And we keep looking at those things and we can reinforce that until on some level we know that we did know the truth all along, even if we were confused about some things. And we start to realize that figuring out that we did know the truth, that the people around us who were teaching us to believe other things were maybe wrong on some level, or we at least have different perceptions from what they do. Um, it's very rewarding to come back home to ourselves, to realize that we kind of knew all along what was really going on some level, and that we can take apart the lies and get better and better and better at trusting ourselves and no longer falling into the trap of manipulation and gaslighting. Let me look back at my notes real quickly and make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep, that's it for that section. I'll see you in the next one. And the next section is about how some of us, not all of us, can be susceptible, even after we've left one fundamentalist religion, can be susceptible to getting involved in other fundamentalist religions.